Thank you all for inviting me to share my views with you. But I have two constraints. The first one is I don't have to explain that food is green. So, all about food future, green future, I think we have it. The second one is, today is 18th of September. Before the 4th of August, if you could have talked about green, you would have indicated a particular direction. If you could have come for a TED conference, which starts with a red, you still could have had a certain indication. So, interesting. Times change very fast. I want to share with you three things. The first one is I would request you to go with me into some kind of dreamland. And Caesar has talked about Vision 2030. Some kind of dreamland, and say, what kind of a future are we thinking about and aspiring to be in this country in the next 20 years? So I would request that you go with me to that kind of journey. And then we'll pause and say, is this a dream, or how do we turn it into reality? And finally, I will tell you something about being innovative. The 2-3 things that we think you can do in order to realize this dream. All of you do know that we have a Vision 2030. I'm happy to have been involved in the formulation of this vision. The objective is for us to become globally competitive and to live in a prosperous country. You can't say that any better than this time after we promulgated the Constitution. Just imagine that being your city. And I know we talked about the flyovers that are coming outside here. But just imagine, look at that. I was caught up in a traffic jam for 2 hours coming here. But look at that. A country where there is prosperity, a city where there is interconnection, not just by road, by rail, by plane, by everything. One that is green. As you can see the skies. You don't see the smoke. So that's the kind of aspirations that we have in the next 20 years to turn this country. How about our natural heritage? We all know that we are endowed with several natural heritage. About Kenya, you can't take it away from us. Mara, you can't take it away from us. We would aspire to become, one of the most important tourist destinations in the world, where the communities where these tourists are going would be able to derive incomes and livelihoods from those resources. Would want to maintain those resources much more sustainably in order to have a green future. How about our agriculture? 2 things. I'll come to this later on as we talk about food. One, where you are having a commercially oriented agriculture that not only produces for other countries because we are globally connected, but also one that provides food security for our people. I'll talk about food security later on. This is our aspiration, to ensure that we have enough food, but also we are commercially oriented and we can produce for others. How about governance? We've just seen the promulgation of a new constitution. A devolved government, that is City Hall in Nairobi County. A devolved government where resources are divided to go into the grassroots, and the decisions are made from the grassroots upwards, where there is respect for the people, there is equitable distribution of wealth, what a country and what a time. How about the social infrastructure? I would want to call them challenges. One of it, and when I was being requested to prepare this, I looked at the Constitution, the new Constitution, and I said, what are the 3 challenges that we have in the new Constitution? One of it is the implementation. I remember having discussed with Julie one time, as we were all celebrating about our new Constitution, and I said, somebody told me that having a new Constitution is like eating food. it either can be good for your stomach or you can get constipated. And I remember Jude said, yeah, but we know that the food we were eating before was not good, which is true. The second issue is to address our economy and to address our rural development strategy. What there is that we are growing, and somebody talked about countries within this region growing the fastest. There are countries that are recording a 10% growth, but that is growth without equity. It is growth that is being driven by a few sectors that will not necessarily lead to poverty reduction or food security. And I'll give you an example. The fastest growing subsector is the service industry. It is the mobile phones we are using. It's everything that relates to service. Now, a few people are making billions of money out of that, but that will not pull our people out of poverty. We need the sectors to grow, such as agriculture, such as manufacturing, where our people are, in order to ensure that you grow with equity. Otherwise, you will be creating 10 billions, and you'll be creating 10 billions, and what was the other one? 10 billions and 10 billion beggars. So growth with equity is a great challenge. Food insecurity in the region, in Horn of Africa, and particularly in this country, is a big challenge. Even as we go back to our aspirations about agriculture, just imagine a report released 2 weeks ago by an organization in the UK called Maplecraft recorded Kenya among, actually it was number 12 in terms of, in ranks of food insecurity. Out of 166 countries, Kenya was recorded number 12. All the 11 countries were within the region. Now, just imagine, in this particular country, we are depending on a quarter of maize as imports from our neighbors. So we are importing a quarter of our maize needs from our neighbors and outside the country. We are supposed to be consuming about 35 million bags. There's a deficit of about 10 million bags. That's huge. We are only producing about a quarter of our wheat. The rest of it is coming from outside. There's nothing wrong with coming from outside, but I'll come to that in a moment. We are also producing less than a third of our rice. And we can go on and on and on. This is a situation that is not sustainable for two reasons. From June 2008, when there was the 4F crisis, where the first of the F was food, others are fuel and finance and whatever else. During the food crisis, the average food prices in the global market have remained high. It's about 30 to 40% above their prior to 2007 averages. It means that if you are to depend on the external market for your food, today you have to pay 40% above what you could have paid in 2008. Remember, food is eaten by us, but also by the majority of the poor. The second issue is that due to climate change, which I'll come to in a moment, countries that otherwise were producing surplus for export, like Ukraine or Russia, will stop producing that. And therefore, even if you have all the money, you have no food. So you cannot depend on the international market for your food. As we used to be taught when we went to study economics, that you can do comparative advantage. You mine, get money, and buy food from outside. Now, we saw that in 2008, countries, I was in Beijing actually, when the Chinese government banned exports without knowing how much food they had in stock because there was panic. And the third thing is climate change. Now, climate change has come in. It's not negotiable. We do know the impacts. We are now seeing new diseases emerging, such as malaria, moving to high-rads, what we used to call high-rads. But much more important, we are seeing higher frequency of drought and floods. I used to do a lot of work on this, and if you look at what has happened in the last 15 years, it has moved from huge droughts they have become more frequent and more intense. And now we are getting almost a major drought every 4 years. So you can be sure that from 2008, 2009, 2013, 2014, we'll get another drought. Now we are in La Nina already. Now these are huge challenges for us, and particularly if they are making a bad situation worse where you may not have enough food, and particularly where the food is for the poor. So climate change itself is a big, big, big issue. And we need to think about three things as we address the issue of climate change. And I have had a lot of discussions that we have released very small proportion of carbon. That's okay, we are suffering the consequences now. We need to do our mitigation, we need to go back and plant. And I'm saying we, I'm not saying them, we. We have to ensure that we are planting Mau today. And we are planting Abadeas today. We need to ensure that we are doing agroforestry and so on. That's mitigation. We have to do adaptation. Adaptation is all about you spend $1 today, you save 7 when the disaster comes. Now what we're doing now is that we are not saving that dollar now to adapt, we are waiting for the disaster to happen. So we have to do adaptation. Then we have to do resilience. Resilience is all about once you are hit by the impact of the climate change, how do you pick up your pieces and continue with your life? And I'm talking about the communities and the vulnerable communities in our region. I'll come back to those two in a moment because I have 5 minutes. Youth badge, somebody talked about it. It's a critical issue in Africa, it's a critical issue in this country. The ages between 18 and 25, the proportion of that population, and considering that that population is actually marginalized in economic and political arena. So the question is, that is a time bomb. And we saw that in 2008, January. Because they have nothing to lose, they can burn the country. They are not part of you. You have to engage them actively because they have the potential, they have the power, they have the energy. Social insecurity, I think Cesar talked about it. I don't need to go back into it. I think we're spending too much money on security. There's a friend of mine who wrote a book. And this book is called Sorting Out Public Problems with Private Solutions. What happens today is that if you feel insecure in your compound, what you do is that you put a private wall. Insecurity is a public problem, but putting a private wall and engaging guards is a private solution. Public problems are never solved by private solutions. You are only postponing the problem. 3, my third part is innovations. Where I work for the Rockefeller Foundation, a philanthropic organization that has changed the thinking of philanthropy. One of it is to go back to food security and the greening of Africa. And we have what is called Green Revolution in Africa. We feel, just like the clarion call for the World Cup was, it's time for Africa. It was time for Asia, it was time for Latin America, it's time for Africa. And we are coming up with new innovations of achieving Green Revolution in Africa, which I will not go into in the next 4 minutes. But imagine this way. Most of the corporate organizations and banks across the world, not just in Africa, are awash with funds. On the other hand, the population, the poor people, are awash with problems. They cannot access food to buy money to buy yield-enhancing inputs because they don't have credit. So on one hand, you have people who have a lot of money which they would want to give, but on the other hand, you have people demanding money to do what they would want to do in order to improve their lives and become, future green, but they can't. We've seen that as Rockefeller Foundation. One of the things that we are doing is to be an intermediary between the corporate and the poor people, so that this corporate can start engaging in socially and environmentally sustainable ventures, and they will make their own profit through that process. We call that process impact investing. You can get a lot of details in our website, but the bottom line is that is an innovation. It is happening in this country. It's happening 2 weeks ago. It was happening in Nigeria. We feel that is one way of ensuring that we move forward. As you green what we call the bread baskets, which is the Rift Valleys of this country, what happens to the Machakos and the others? If you can introduce the aspect of carbon trading, introduce the aspect of producing for energy, you can green areas that otherwise were not green. So again, being innovative in your approach. The second innovation that we are doing is, as I said, the climate change is with us. How about trying to use ICT as an enabler of development? Because to a large extent, we have used ICT as a service. And one of the things that we are doing and trying, it's moving very, very, very fast, is to use customer care call centers as centers to get technical information about the greening, whether it is farming, whether it is your environment, where you call a number using a mobile phone if you're a farmer, and you ask the problem to the other side, and you are given a solution there and there. You don't have to have somebody with a motorbike to come to your place. And innovation, thinking differently in order to have a future economy and a green future. The third one is the droughts are going to be with us. Food insecurity is going to be with us, about coming up with a model that can predict that there's going to be a drought in the next 9 months. And therefore, in order to do that, you have to put in mechanisms that will stop the drought from becoming a famine. Because a drought and famine are two different things. They are synonymous in Africa, but they are two different things. About developing a model that will tell you in 9 months there's going to be that drought, and you mobilize resources. Now, this, to me, is what will make us achieve the green revolution, the greening and the prospects of our vision 2030. So, my view is this. The how, the what is very clear. The how is for you and me to achieve it. Thank you.